All right, I think we're about ready to start. Can everybody see and hear me? Okay, great. Let's see. Wonderful. Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Arnab Chatterjee. I'm here from Digital Transitions at our studio in beautiful New York right now. Thank you so much for joining us. As we all know, this is a very trying, unusual, unprecedented time, and hope you're all doing well, safe, and glad that of the many things you could have chosen to tune into or watch, you've chosen to be here with us. So just to kind of tell you the brief kind of outline for how this is going to go. We are, of course, as you know, talking about the XF IQ4 system today. This is meant to be as interactive as possible. So I'm going to give a brief presentation. I'm going to show you some of the features of the camera and the system. But what I really want to allow for is time for you guys to ask questions, and for me to, while I have you online, I have the camera set up, I want to show you what it is that you want to see. If you haven't ever used a Phase One system, if you're a Phase One user that wants to learn a little bit more about the system, whatever it is, this is your time to do that. So just a quick kind of platform thing here. So I will be keeping an eye on questions, and Kate Stone will be moderating the chat. So if you have any questions or anything goes on in the you need to discuss, Kate will bring it to my attention. Kate, I believe there's a poll. I don't know if folks can see it about what types of cameras you have experience with, what you use. I would be really interested to hear just kind of what folks are using right now. Throw away my phone for now, but oh, great. Okay, so it looks like folks have already answered some of these questions. All right. Okay, good. And the answers are still rolling in, so I'm going to give you guys a quick second to do that. Okay. All right. And just to say right off the bat, this sort of thing is new for us. So we apologize if it seems a little bit, it's not quite optimized, but we hope to be doing more of this. Obviously, we hope to be doing more in-person demos once things improve, but this is very much something that we want your feedback for. So as we kind of move through the presentation, just keep in mind, and we'll be sending out a survey where you can provide your feedback, and we can figure out how to continue to do this in a better fashion going forward. So if we look at the poll, we've got about 50% of the audience has answered, and about half, almost half of you folks use Phase One medium format, and that kind of makes sense. People that receive our newsletter and that sort of thing are a good amount of them are our clients. About another 45% or so are using DSLRs or mirrorless cameras, so 35mm format of some sort potentially, or smaller micro four thirds, APS-C. And then we have some folks that are using other medium format systems. Of course, you have the Hasselblads and the Fujis and those sorts of things out there. Very curious what the something else is. I wonder if I'm going to type that in the chat. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, there's plenty of great options out there. Even your phone has incredible image quality these days. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes up image quality and why you might use one camera system over another. All right. But without any further ado, let me go ahead and pull up kind of the presentation. And this is just a little guideline to kind of let you follow along what we're talking about. And so I'm going to share my screen here. Share the screen. And okay. Kate, could you let me know if you can see that? Okay, great. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and present. And all right. So today we're going to be talking about the Phase One IQ4 system. Before we kind of go into sort of all of these details, though, I want to talk a little bit about what Phase One is, and also who we are as digital transitions. So to start off, digital transitions, we're a company of about 25 folks here in New York. We have a showroom in LA as well as the one here. And we are the world's largest dealer for Phase One medium format solutions. We offer obviously hardware, but also courses, software, and all sorts of solutions for both commercial photographers and also cultural heritage institutions make up a large portion of our business. So, the Getty Museum, Smithsonian, those folks. So we really do have some interesting and amazing clients that we work with. Personally, my name is Arnab Chatterjee. Like I said, I'm a technical specialist here at DT. I run a lot of our demos. So if you've ever come in asking about a system, if you wanted to see some features or something like that, I do a lot of those things in person. And so I was more than happy when they asked me to do this webinar. Just so you know, Digital Transitions, we are a small business, but we've been around for over, I think, 15 years now. Through ups and downs. We know a lot of our clients, photographers, freelancers especially, are struggling right now. So our heart goes out to you, and we appreciate you tuning in here, and hopefully some of this information will be helpful for you guys moving forward. But the sort of history behind medium format. Medium format has become a term that's popped up more and more now recently, especially that other larger camera manufacturers have entered the field. The Fuji in particular has brought a lot of attention to it. I get a lot of questions from folks who say, has Fuji taken away a lot of your business? And the answer is actually no. They've definitely brought some additional systems to market, but they've also gotten a lot of people curious about medium format and talking about medium format and what that is. So to talk about medium format, first I want to kind of talk about what a format is and what the types of formats are. So if the idea of a format came from the film days, right? So if you were shooting something like a Canon AE1, it's a nice, portable, inexpensive system. It's got, great automated modes. It's got, I don't think the AE1 has autofocus, but some of them, have autofocus and auto metering and that sort of stuff. And in order to be nice and portable, they had to have, a small piece of film in there that you were exposing. And so that has become what we now call, quote unquote, full frame 35 millimeter. So if you're shooting, a top of the line Sony or Nikon or Canon, something along those lines, that is what you're using. It's, a 35 millimeter film sized sensor. Now, back in the day, we had also, things started out with large format. And I'm going to switch back over to my video here, just so you can see. I don't have an example of a small format camera, but this here is a sort of small view camera. And so this is sort of like a mini example of what they would have been using in the large format days. And people do still shoot large format. But if you take a look, you can't really pick this up and shoot it handheld. There are a lot of really interesting things you can do with it in terms of moving specific parts up and down, left and right, tilting them back and forth, that give you really interesting creative control over your images. But it's expensive to shoot larger pieces of film. It's also expensive to produce larger sensors. And it takes away from the portability and the usability in a lot of ways as well. So what do we do if we want to have really, really good image quality and some really nice features, but we also want to have flexibility and usability? What we do is we introduce something in the middle. And so the reason it's called medium format is because it uses a type of sensor or a type of film that is larger than 35 millimeter and smaller than your large format sheet film. And so I actually have here one of the most popular medium format systems. And I apologize for switching back and forth here. But this here is the Hasselblad 500 series. I'm sure, has anyone shot Hasselblad 500 series camera, whether on film or digital? Surely some folks have. Yes, okay, good, in the chat. And so you can see the size of the sensor, or where the sensor or the piece of film would go, is much larger than it would be on 35 millimeter, but it's not as large as it would be on a view camera. And so I can take this camera, I can carry it around, I can easily see and compose my image. And so it's portable, but it gives me a larger, higher quality image than I would from 35 millimeter film in particular. So let's take a look, and I'm going to share my screen again here, and we'll talk a little bit about what this means in the context of what medium format is. So medium format is this sort of middle ground between having a system that is portable and affordable, versus like large format film, and is going to give you the speed and automated modes that you need, while also giving you incredible image quality, letting you make large prints, having nice large pixels for giving you really clean images, and having optimized color and dynamic range. So this is the reason that medium format was invented, and the reason that it's called medium format is because it's it's between sort of small and large format, as they're called. So that's kind of the history of the term. Again, this is just kind of where it's defined by the film size. The format that we're going to be talking about is what's called 645, and what you'll see is it's called 645 because, where did I put my digital back here? Our sensor is in a 4:3 ratio, and it's going to have in the film days, right, it would be 60 inches wide. I'm sorry, 60 inches, 60 millimeters by 45 millimeters. Some of that area goes to sort of the rebate edges of the film. So the imaging area actually ends up being closer to 54 by 40 millimeters. But as you can see, that's much larger than the 24 by 36 millimeters that you'd be getting on a Sony or a Canon or a Nikon. And so that's where the size comes from. And if you hear the term 645, that just refers to this particular piece of medium format film that was then converted into the standard size for medium format digital sensors. Okay. Again, here's a comparison. You can see that the sensor on the modern Phase One digital backs is going to be about 2.5 times larger than a DSLR sensor or a mirrorless camera sensor. And we'll talk about how that impacts image quality and sort of the user experience as we move forward. I thought I had a slide in here talking a little bit about the history of Phase One. And so I do want to take a second to sort of address that. And hang on. Kate, can you hear me? Can you talk back at me if you can hear me? Okay, perfect. Can you guys see my video right now at the same time? Okay, good. So, when the digital revolution came about, right, you had your cameras that, professionals were shooting film with, right? So they were shooting typically large format or medium format film. And companies decided that, in order to transition over to digital, we need to make a sensor that we can put onto these cameras. And so, the way that you put film into a medium format camera, in most cases, is a separate detachable back that you would attach onto the hooks here. It would plug in, and then it would operate properly. And so it made sense that, rather than having a single integrated system, you would have a digital back that you would use and attach in here. And then that would be the way that you would convert your camera to digital. And so the first medium format digital cameras were sort of hybrids using film bodies and lenses and digital sensors. And so I have here one of the earliest medium format digital backs. This was the Kodak DCS Pro back with a square sensor, 36 by 36, so smaller than the current sensors, but it was square format, which people absolutely loved if they were shooting Hasselblad in particular. And as you can see, it has the hooks on there. I attach it there, plug it in here, and it locks in place. And now I have a single unit that I can operate the same way as I would with film, but now I have a digital sensor that's attached to it. This is a brick in that it doesn't function, but you can see that from the early days, this was kind of the way that it was done with a separate digital back, and that sort of legacy has continued throughout the way that the systems have been designed. And so this is something that is very different from 35 millimeter systems where you have a body and then you have the lens that you put on it, right? So the ecosystem for digital medium format, there are now mirrorless options out there as well that do kind of meld the two, but those fall into sort of three components. So you have the digital back, which is going to have your sensor. Then you have your camera body, which is going to have the sort of controls for the shutter mechanism and sometimes the aperture and the shutter speeds, and then your lens, right? So these components remain the same. It's just the digital back is now a separate piece. Okay, so the Phase One medium format backs nowadays are less clunky, right? And they feature larger sensors. So every modern Phase One digital back is going to have a sensor this size. And so this is that 54 by 40 millimeter sensor that is going to have a much larger physical footprint than a 35 millimeter camera. And it's also going to have a higher resolution. So in this case, we're looking at the IQ4 150 megapixel. It's going to have 151 megapixels or so, as opposed to, I think right now, the highest resolution 35 millimeter camera would be the A7R4, which is about 60 something megapixels, and on a 35 millimeter sensor. And one of the things that I just want to make a note of is if you have a large sensor like this, you can put more pixels on there and still give them, sort of breathing room. Let them be nice and large, let them pick up more light individually. Whereas on a smaller sensor, if you increase your resolution, you're really going to start cramming them onto that sensor. And we'll see that has a variety of different effects on image quality. There are ways to make it work really, really well. And another thing that I do want to bring up, and this is you'll see this later when we talk about some of the features of the system. But the most advanced imaging sensors right now, in terms of architecture and design and functionality, are not in Phase One. They're not in like a 35mm DSLR. They are in cell phones. No joke, because those pixels are about a micron or less. So they're super, super small. They don't get a lot of light, and so they have to do a lot of really interesting things to keep the signals clean. They don't have a physical shutter, so they have to do really interesting things to actually read everything out at the same time. And so one of the really interesting things about cell phone cameras is that's where nowadays the latest and greatest technology on the bleeding edge gets tested. So you may know there are different types of sensor architectures. There was originally CCD, then there was what's called CMOS, which is sort of the modern way to go. And then there are what are called backside illuminated CMOS sensors, which were originally used in cell phones and are now used in the Phase One IQ4 150. And sort of the next step is what's called stacked chip architecture, which is currently in cell phones and has yet to make it to medium format of any kind. But the newest Sony is, because Sony is the largest manufacturer of image sensors in the world, actually do have that architecture. And so it kind of starts small and builds its way up. So that's just kind of an interesting point there. And when you have bigger pixels, it makes things easier in terms of getting better image quality. But we are constantly kind of prototyping these new ways with smaller sensors, and then we move those sort of innovations up to larger sensors. So that's a really kind of interesting way that this technology develops. Okay. As I mentioned before, and I do apologize if I get off topic. I like kind of talking about the technical side of things, but I want to make sure we do keep it moving here. So we have our digital back that we talked about, and we talked about how back in the day, we had these film bodies that we just put digital backs on, and that works fine, but it doesn't take full advantage of what these digital backs have to offer. And so to build a truly, the most powerful system that you can around a digital back, you have to build a body that is designed specifically for digital. And so this is what Phase One did with the XF camera system. And so here, this is the XF body. You can see right now that I don't have a viewfinder attached, and I'll explain why in just a second. But you can see that the mirror box and the shutter mechanism are the same size as the sensor, of course. And there are the same sort of hooks that we have here on the back, and we would attach the lens on the front. So, and I have a tripod plate on here on the bottom. So that's what that is. That's not part of the camera. I just have that on there. And one of the things that I'll talk about with the Phase One systems is that they are designed to be really, really modular. And so I have a few different options for viewfinders. And one of them is going to be this really kind of cool waist level viewfinder. And I brought the Hasselblad out here partly to kind of show you where this comes from, right? So, I have the option to shoot from the waist level, for sort of the legacy film shooters that are used to that. There's an option to do that on the XF as well. Now, if I want to shoot in sort of a more traditional prism finder, if I'm a 35mm shooter, I have, of course, the prism finder. Now, one of the things that I want you to take a note of is look at how big the screen is there. So obviously this is an optical viewfinder, so you're not looking into a screen. You have the mirror that will come down here when we attach the digital back. And so you are seeing through the lens optically. That image is being bounced up on this mirror onto this beautiful, large focusing screen. And then you're viewing it through this big prism. So one of the things that, and when you come in for a demo, because I know all of you are going to come in for a demo once this is, taken care of. One of the first things that you'll notice is that when you look through the viewfinder, it's bright, it's large, it's roomy, it's gorgeous. And that makes a huge difference, larger than I think a lot of people realize. One of the things that really sets apart the Phase One systems from other systems that I've used is just how clean and simple and user-friendly everything is. And there is a big focus on ergonomics as well. So whether that's how the camera holds, how it feels when you hold it, or how easy it is on the eyes when you're looking through the viewfinder, all of these things have been considered and thought of. So I'm going to attach the digital back right now. Again, we've got those same hooks, and you can see the electrical contacts here, mate with the electrical contacts on the body. So we're going to have complete communication between the two. And it's nice and secure on there, so that's not going to come apart. And then again, I have these electrical contacts on my viewfinder, and that's going to slot on to the top there. All right, so everything is nice and secure. And you can see this is the XF body with the IQ4 digital back. All right, so this is the core of our system that we're going to be talking about today. The next, yes.
When you're doing the hardware demonstration and showing how it puts together, can you minimize the slideshow? It's a little hard to see with the smaller screen. Thank you.
Okay. Is it better? Okay. Okay. Yeah. And so let me just show you that again, just to quickly go through it. So you have the viewfinder, right? The nice and large viewfinder. You have the digital back, which attaches with the locking hooks on there. And then you have the XF body with the nice large prism finder as well. And we'll put that all together. Again, it's more pieces than you would have on a 35mm system, but it doesn't take you that long to put together at all. Okay, so the next part of the system, and I'm just going to show you the slide, and then I'll pop back over here. Nope, nope, not what I wanted to do. Okay, are the Phase One lenses. And so, again, starting from the medium format days, there were these lenses that were used with the film bodies, which were designed for film. The Hasselblad lenses and, some of these, Mamiya, other names that you may have heard, they made really, really nice lenses. And so for the earlier digital backs that were maybe, up to 60 or 80 megapixels, those lenses look really, really good. And they still look good on higher megapixel backs. They still have the appropriate amount of coverage to give you a full image without any vignetting. But their detail rendition is sometimes not strong enough for a higher resolution digital back. And so Phase One had to design a lineup of lenses that was going to be able to resolve images up to, not just 100 megapixels or 150 megapixels, but 200, 250 megapixels and more. I don't know, and I'm gonna I'm going to hop back over to the chat here. Okay, so is there anyone out there who uses a Canon 5DSR? I'm going to call out Canon on this one specifically. Okay, all right, we got a couple of 5DSR users. So Canon did a really, really cool thing. I mean, they had, or a 5DS, yeah. So they had, you know, their 5D Mark III at the time, 22 megapixel camera, really, really fabulous system. You know, nothing against it, nothing, you know, or anything wrong with it at all. And then they decided, you know what, we're going to go crazy with the megapixels. We're going to go all the way to 50 megapixels from 22. And they did it. They absolutely pulled it off. You know, after that 5DS came out, you know, they won the megapixel race for 35 millimeter shooters. Nobody else had that many megapixels. The problem with that was all of their systems prior to that had been, you know, under half that amount of resolution. And so their lenses looked really, really good on the 5D, you know, Mark III, 5D Mark IV even. But the sensor on the 5DS and 5DSR started to out-resolve the lenses. And what that means is that the lenses were, you know, they just couldn't resolve the amount of detail that the sensor could handle. And so you got images that looked, you know, not quite as sharp as they could be. And that's something that personally I've heard from a lot of folks who switch from Canon to Phase One. And I know that, you know, there are new lenses that, you know, Canon has started to make for, you know, the whether it's the EOS system or, you know, the new RF system. Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, there had to be a redesign of those systems going from, you know, 25 to 50 megapixels. Phase One and medium format in general has gone from, you know, 30, you know, 39 to 65 to 80 to 100 to 150 megapixel jumps. Like when they go from, you know, one level to the next, it's from like 100 to 150, right? So if you don't have lenses that are designed for these really high resolution sensors and you're making big jumps like that, you're gonna have to redesign your lens lineup every time you release a new back, or it's not gonna be able to handle the resolution of the sensors. And so this was why Phase One went and said, you know, look, when we design these blue ring lenses, we need to make sure that they can hold up to sensors that don't even exist yet, all right? So that is part of the reason that these blue ring lenses were designed. So as far as features of the back, I see someone is asking, we absolutely will be. We'll be showing you that. So, okay. So hopping over to the lenses, again, here we have our little blue ring lens. This is a 120 millimeter macro. Personally, one of my favorite lenses, super, super sharp, great for close-up images, but also a really nice focal length for portraiture. So typical bayonet mount, and we are good to go. We've got our system assembled here. Okay, so let's go back kind of over to the rest of the system, the accessories that we need. So batteries, very important. Phase One has a battery in both the digital back and in the camera body itself for every single one of their models, which is handy because you can use them on, you know, any type of camera that way, whether it's on, you know, an older film camera or a camera body that doesn't have its own battery. That's nice. Okay, so I hear that we're wanting some more specific IQ4 content here. Okay, so that's good. I'll kind of speed through, you know, what we're going through here. So jumping over to the IQ4, one of the updates that they made to the IQ4 was the addition of new faster card slots and tethering options. So we have SDXC and XQD. XQD is going to be the same form factor as the next sort of generation, which is called CF Express. And so that is going to be compatible with the the IQ4 system via a simple firmware update that will be coming. So let's pop these guys in here. I'll put the SD in first and then XQD. It's easiest that way. Okay. And we have our batteries, we have our cards. We'll turn on the system here and we are ready to go. Okay. So yeah, let's take a look a little bit more at the IQ4 back itself. As you can see on here, we have our card slots, but we also have a few ports. So there we go. Sorry, I keep hitting the battery slot there. So as far as tethering options go, we have a USB-C option here, which is what we're going to be using. We're also going to have a gigabit Ethernet option, which is great for longer cable lengths of up to 100 meters. And you're also going to have options for inputs that you've always had. There's going to be a flash sync and also a PC sync. This also is a new interface. It's a 12-pin versus the 8-pin of the previous design, and that gives you extra options for triggering. Okay. Question, can you shoot tethered to the computer and to the card at the same time? I believe that the current version of the IQ4 does support multiple outputs. So you can shoot to the cards, you can shoot to a computer hard drive as well. So those options are there, and I'll show you some of the other additional software the other additional options that are available. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Sorry, I'm just jumping through the presentation, making sure that we cover all the little things that we need to before we hop over to. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot of folks here understand the XF camera system. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to tether up, and then I'm going to show you some of the newer features that have been installed in Capture One. So what I'm going to do is hop over here. Okay, I see someone has a question about the IQ4 back getting very hot during live view use. And that is absolutely something that is true with the IQ4 in particular. I don't have an exact temperature range. There is a shutoff where it will give you a warning and say the overheating warning, we're going to automatically power it down. What I can tell you, though, is that I do a lot of work with cultural heritage imaging. And so what that means is shooting in live view down on a copy stand for 6 to 8 hours. The back gets really, really, really hot. We're capturing, hundreds of images, in sequence with live view on the entire time. And I've not had a shutoff warning. So I don't have a hard number for you, but we've done that, and we've been doing that for months at a time, and there's no, sort of issues with damage. The back still works fine. So that is really normal for the back to get really hot. but we haven't experienced any issues with that. So I apologize for not having a hard number on that, but I can look into that as well. So one of the nice things, if you've used Phase One back, you know that the tethering port is very, very deep in the camera itself. So it'll go all the way in there. And that way, you know, while I'm moving it around, it's not going to just pop out. You know, a lot of systems have, I'm sorry, there we go. A lot of systems have cable supports that you need to get. So, you know, that's not something that you have to do with Phase One digital backs of any kind. If we take a look at, somebody had a question. Okay, let's see. The Arca ball head mount recommended not. Yes. So this plate is awesome. It's part of our L bracket. So the question was, is this mount nice? Is this the right one to use? And the issue with some of the lenses is if you're using it with the 120 macro and it extends a little bit too far out, it can kind of catch the bottom of the lens and make it a pain to use. Absolutely, this is the Arca bracket that we recommend, and there's also an L bracket that fits onto this that you can use to change the orientation of the camera, which is useful on a copy stand. I'm assuming that's PD Young from Art Institute of Chicago. PD, is that you? Okay, I figured. So yeah, so I'll get in contact with you after this and and we'll show you. But yeah, so that is what we recommend for that, and it works really well on a copy stand as well. So yeah, and then this actually I didn't point this out. This is the P0 hybrid head from Arca. It's a really cool head because it has both the ball head on there if you want to use it, but it also has the same fine-tuning features as the Arca Swiss Cube, which is a really, really nice tripod head that some of you may use. And so I highly, highly recommend this. The Cube is super nice because it lets you, have all these precise movements and everything, but there's no way to rapidly adjust it. This is called the hybrid because it has both. So love this head. It's great for, if you do a mix of work for architecture and, for portraiture, would absolutely recommend that as well. So if we take a look at this guy, now we've got it all tethered up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and share my screen now. Let's see, show my entire screen, screen 2. Okay, can you guys see, there should be a little elephant on the screen. Now live view should have popped up. Okay, great. So ignore the mess in the studio. You didn't see anything. Okay, cool. So we're gonna move in here a little bit. And I just set up a little stand here with some, miscellaneous pieces that we can shoot just to show you kind of what the features are like on here. And actually, I wanted to, okay, never mind. So they were doing construction earlier, and part of what they had was this, you ever seen those things on the street where there's a pipe that just blows out steam, that kind of stuff? It was running earlier and you could see it going across the window. And so one of the things I want to show you is called frame averaging. It's a feature that lets you do really long exposures in most lighting conditions without a set of filters. But I'll just make some movement. So, but if we take a look here, you can see that I have my live view. It's nice and fast and responsive, even though we're using a 150 megapixel sensor. Let me just lock this down here. So the L bracket actually designed for the system that we're talking about here is really nice. And wonder if I can get someone to go grab it. I don't think so. We're running a skeleton crew in here right now, as you know. But you can move the camera forward or backward on that L bracket to make sure that it stays out of the way of your cable. So Kate, if you could just make a note, we'll send out some information about the tripod head and the L bracket and that kind of stuff, because it seems like a lot of folks like that. So, okay, so we're gonna move in on here, and I've got my handy tripod studio stand deal going. All right. Okay, so we're going to use our friend the elephant here as our example. And for those of you that are users of the XF system, you know that pretty much everything that I want to do, I can do remotely. So I'm going to go ahead and focus using the remote focus tools here. And I can also autofocus if I so choose. I'm just going to do it manually for now. And one of the just super helpful features of the IQ4 is the ability to have live, what you see is what you get feedback on live view. So you can see that as I increase my exposure, I can see exactly what I'm going to get. Now I also have the ability to turn that off if I so choose, but that is one really helpful feature that you have. Now, the other thing that I just absolutely love about the IQ4, and live view in particular, is this. You guys see those green little pixels? Are those showing up? Okay, great. So as you can see, when I shift my focus, I have focus peaking. And that's going to show up on the part of the image that's in focus. And so, this was something that was previously in Capture One as the focus master tool, but you could only do that in images that you'd already shot. So now you're able to do that in live view. And so this is a really useful tool. And since I know we have a few cultural heritage shooters out there, one of the ways in which this is really useful is if I'm shooting film, I can see, because alignment is super important. So if I get focus peaking showing up in all 4 corners, I know that I'm in focus. If I only see it in 2 corners, I know which way I need to adjust my skew. So that's a really nice feature of the IQ4 that really helps save time and helps you pre-visualize your images like that. Okay, so you can see we're going to focus on our guy here. That's a good question. Is live view more responsive at 100%? I haven't used an IQ3100 in a while, but I always found that live view depended a little bit more responsivity-wise, and maybe this is just because of the computer that I was using, that it was more limited on the computer side than it was on the IQ4 side. But I have found that the images work just fine. Okay. Yes, yeah, that's right. And the refresh rate is also going to help, based on the exposure time. So. How do we handle focus? Okay. So how badly is it going to crash your computer when you're doing focus stacking? Let's see. There we go. Okay, cool. So working with 150 megapixel source files it definitely requires having a powerful computer any way you slice it. We have done large image stacks on Helicon Focus. Right now, I'm on a an iMac Pro that's nice and tricked out. So, that does a very good job of it. The IQ4 XF feature, the most current feature update has in the focus stacking tool, it will it will provide you with a number of frames that it thinks you should take, and it is always on the high side because it's calculating it based on the super shallow depth of field. But we've done stacks with up to 100 images on the 150 MP, and it certainly takes a while, but it gets the job done. Christopher, in particular, though, when we're doing that, we do it as an 8-bit TIFF, and we make sure that we made all of our adjustments prior to having done that. So we're not working with 16-bit TIFFs, because that would just absolutely bog things down even more than usual. All right. Okay. All right. So let's see. We have the live view focus peaking. We also have, again, the auto live view. So if I'm in a situation where I'm shooting with flash, for instance, and so my exposure time is going to be, like 1,000th of a second. But if I change it to 1,000th of a second, I'm going to have a preview that looks like that. I can just change it over to my auto live view, and it's going to keep my shutter speed where it is, but it's going to provide me with a normal, looking live view. So it gives you that sort of, natural expected look, and I can toggle that really easily. So, the what you see is what you get feature is really useful, but you don't have to use it. It's an option. Now I'm going to show you some of the more interesting new tools that we have here. And so, unfortunately, there's no really good way for me to show these on the screen. So here's what I'm going to do: is I'm going to stop the screen share temporarily, and I'm going to try and swing the camera around as far as possible, so that you guys can kind of get a look at. Okay, I'm back. Is everything working? I tried to close live view, but I was in the wrong program. So, okay, good. And you can hear me too? Okay, good. So, technical difficulties aside, let's see. Yeah, I don't know how well this is going to work. So I'll just kind of let you know that what we're doing on the digital back is something that you can only do from the digital back. You can't do it from Capture One when we're talking about these new tools as of yet. It's certainly something that could come in the future, but right now these are tools that you have to access from the digital back. And so the first of these is what we're going to call automated frame averaging. So how many of you guys have heard about this feature, this automated frame averaging? Okay. I was going to ask, okay, how many people have used it? Okay, great. And it sounds like people have had positive experiences with it. Just to kind of explain it for the folks that haven't, one of the features of using these modern sensors, these CMOS sensors, and right now this backside illuminated CMOS sensor, is the ability to have an electronic shutter just reading directly off of the system without having to have a mechanical shutter firing. So that has the advantage of decreasing vibration, but it also gives you the ability to do some really creative things with the data you're reading off of the sensor. Okay, cool. So we have a lot of folks that haven't done this before. So what I'm going to do is, and by the way, absolutely, first things first, I want to talk about the caveats of using a rolling shutter. It is going to, if you have really, really fast movement, cause blur. regardless of how fast your shutter speed is. And that's because it takes time to roll down the sensor. Now for frame averaging, that doesn't matter because the whole point is to get a longer exposure and you would get blur anyway. But you may notice some wonkiness if you're trying to use it in other settings. But let's take a look. I'm going to go back over to sharing my screen. Okay, so you guys can see Capture One again. Great. So I'm going to pull up, let me just delete all these images here. Actually, I want to delete all those images except, call it thing. Okay. So I'm just going to go back to our example here, and we'll get a nice sharp shot of our elephant friend. Thank you, focus peaking. Yeah, I'd say F11 is fine. Obviously, we would want to be using focus stacking if we really wanted to get this all in focus, but just for the purposes of this example. And by the way, if those fuzzies do get in the way, you can always turn them off from the digital back. One of the things that at first I didn't realize was you can't access the live view tools from Capture One. And when you try and open live view on the digital back, when you have live view open in Capture One, it just says live view not available. But you can swipe on the system in the live view on the back, and it'll still show you all the options. So you can turn it on and off from there, even though you can't see it on the digital back. And that is correct. You cannot access it through Capture One currently. It should be, but right now you can't, which is a pain. Now, frame averaging for Art Repro, noise reduction. This is a super interesting question. So one of the things about frame averaging, and I'll show you guys when we get into it, but the principle behind frame averaging is I take an image and then I take a series of subsequent images, and then I take all of the content pixel by pixel and I average it together. So one of the things that Brian is talking about, and the noise reduction aspect of it, is thermal noise on the sensor is random, right? So it's going to pop in at certain intervals and not at others. And so if you take a longer exposure and you average that out, you will reduce noise. And so would I use it for art reproduction? I think if you have the time and you don't have a moving subject, there's really no reason not to. I mean, granted, the noise floor on any of the Phase One digital backs is super low. I mean, it's just super low. But if you're shooting in particular like a high dynamic range image, it's it's definitely something that can help you keep your shadows cleaner. If you're going to be pushing them up or down. I know one example is I was talking to some folks at the Museum of Modern Art, and they have some artwork that is it has neon lights as part of it, which are obscenely bright, right? And there's not a lot of content in them, but if you want to get those and have files be as flexible as possible, what you want to do is you want to underexpose, so you keep as much detail as possible in the highlights, and then you can pull your shadows up. And so that's a perfect example of a time where when you're shooting a piece of artwork, you would definitely want to have that noise reduction and when I say noise reduction, I mean you want to have your noise level as low as possible. And so frame averaging would be a really good choice for that. And so that's a very good question. We also have used it for really high density film, particularly black and white. And you can really bust through the really dense parts of the negative. Let's see, clarify the accessibility, focus peaking, and live view through Capture One. Okay, so I'm Okay. Okay, so when you can access the focus peaking, unless I'm mistaken, I don't think there's a tool in Capture One to enable or disable it in live view. I mean, in your images, after you shoot them, you can turn the focus mask on. But from my understanding, so if you're doing this and you want to show the focus mask, you can turn that on and off from Capture One. But Al, I'm not sure if there's a way to do it. That would be awesome. So please let me know. But I don't know a way to do it in live view. Yeah. So George, as of now, my understanding is that it's just in live view. If I'm mistaken, okay. Let's see. Go to. There you go. You can do it. Thank you, Al. I did not know that. That is awesome. See, we learn something every day, and this is the kind of thing that is so great about working in this industry. I mean, you've got clients that are so clever, look through all the features and use things that we don't all the time, and so this is really great. Thank you so much, Al. Awesome. So I appreciate that. That's really great. Now, so let's go ahead and just to kind of jump back to frame averaging. Are there any other questions before I go? Focus peaking, noise, live view response. Okay, cool. So far, I think those are all the questions. And so now I'm going to jump back to how we actually do the frame averaging bit. We'll go to the digital back, and we want to set our exposure as normal, right? So right now, I'm going to say maybe we need to go, that's probably too bright. So let's try that capture here. Right, just turn on my exposure warning. Okay, good. So we're in the clear there. There would be red if there was an issue. So we're good. Delete all my readouts. And so you can see that if I do that, I'm going to have an image that comes out with that exposure, right? So now for those of you that are landscape shooters or have dealt with longer exposures and D-filters and that sort of thing, let's talk about, what would you do next? What would be your next step? So you've got the, and Thomas, I see your question there. Let me get to that in just a second. But for those of you that are landscape shooters, I've got my exposure set, right? I've got my aperture set. That's my optimal aperture. I don't want to change that. My ISO is as low as possible. I know I'm going to get the best, noise control. So now I have to figure out my shutter speed, right? So right now, to get the proper exposure, I need 1 second. But if I want a 5-minute exposure, can anyone tell me in under 10 seconds how many ND filters I need? I don't know. I mean, maybe someone is really good at that math. Yeah, more than yeah. So yeah, and so that's something that's a pain to have to calculate, right? But then on the other hand, you have to consider the impact it's going to have on image quality. Really high quality ND filters are going to have minimal impact on resolution, and they're going to have minimal impact on color. But even no matter how good your ND filter is, if you're putting something between your lens and your object, you're going to get some kind of impact and some kind of degradation in image quality. Everything in an optical system is a low-pass filter of some sort. So the beauty of using automated frame averaging is what it's going to do is it's going to take a bunch of frames at this exposure that I set. And the only thing that's going to change based on my exposure time is the number of frames that it takes. So my overall exposure in every single frame is going to be exactly what it is in the image that I just captured here. Hey, there you go. See, quick math. So yeah, in order to capture the image that I need, I can just select the time. It'll calculate the number of frames that it needs, and then it'll average those out. And you'll see that we get different results based on that. So this is what our exposure looks like sort of as normal, right? If I don't use frame averaging. Now let's go in and do a quick automated frame average. And so I wish I could show you the screen here, but just to kind of let you know, on the left side of the screen, it's showing me what the individual frame exposure is, and that's exactly what we just set, right? 1 second, f11, and 50 ISO. On the right side, it's saying, what is my total time that you want? It's just asking me, hey, how long do you want me to take images? So I'm going to take it, and I'm going to tell it, I would like you to take images for, let's say, 5 seconds, okay? And then I'm going to enter my live view, and I'm going to do this, just kind of come up and down with my hand. All right, and we'll see what impact that has. Okay, so I'm going to start my frame averaging, and I'm just going to bring my hand slowly up and down. Okay. Okay, and so if I close my live view, okay, it's already averaged out more than I thought it was going to. So, okay, let me go to 2 seconds. Let's try this. Okay, so you can see that my hand definitely shows up in the frame, but it's been blurred over time. Okay. Now, if I decide I want to do, and you saw even at 5 seconds it was pretty much gone, but if I do the same thing for 10 seconds, and keep in mind I'm not changing anything with my exposure, I'm not putting any filters on there, I'm not having to do any more math or adjusting or anything. I'm now gonna do the same thing, start my frame averaging, just wave my hand up and down. Okay, and voila, it's pretty much gone. Would this work in conjunction with strobe? That's a good question. I would say no. Because despite the fact that actually, yeah, no, I'm thinking about it. To be honest, I would use bulb and a leaf shutter for this because you're still going to have shutter roll. So I don't think that would be something that you'd want to do. Or if you just pop the flash in the middle of the exposure, that would be the way you'd want to do it. Because if you do the flash at the beginning of the exposure, it's going to create that like skewed electronic shutter effect. Yeah, yes, and that's another thing. Frame averaging is electronic shutter only. It's just continuously reading off the sensor. There's no vibration, which is nice, but it does have that delay period. So I want to jump back to, somebody had a question. Can you demonstrate the focus meter? Thomas, when you say the focus meter, are you talking about the one in Capture 1? Okay, yeah, absolutely. So I can do this real quick. This is a tool, by the way, that's not just in, let me go into my settings here, my HDMI focus peaking, disable, brilliant. And I'm going to put on my focus meter here. And so this tool here, again, is available for any digital back. What this is doing is it's creating a contrast detection spot, and I can add a tool that is my live view focus meter. And so if we zoom in here, what we're going to see is that I have these orange sort of guidelines around here. And those orange guidelines correspond to the orange guidelines on the tool here. And as I move my focus, I need to go further and further away. Oh, that's actually a good point. Yes, I apologize. It's not just phase one digital backs. It is any camera, because keep in mind, it's doing just a readout on the contrast detection on the live view. So it's nice in that it works with any camera on there. But we'll do a quick jump, and you'll see that the closer to the edges the bar is, the orange part of the bar is, the more in focus it is. So you'll see that as we get sharper and sharper and sharper, we continue to jump, and all of a sudden it's gone because we've gone too far. So think of it as like going up a hill. You know, you're going up, you're up, you're up, you're up, you're up, and then you start going down, and that's how you know that you had reached the maximum, right? So you'll go past it, you'll see it drop, and then you'll just bring it back, and you'll see that bar start to fill up again until voila. So that's your live view focus meter. Okay, and so if you want to do really, really close critical focus, especially I do this for film scanning, that is absolutely a tool that you want to use. Focus peaking is nice, but this is going to be really, really exact because you can do it at 100%. Okay. Minimum shutter speed with the electronic shutter. Isn't that a great question? On the IQ4, yeah. So on the IQ3, it was, I think, 1.6 seconds. On the IQ4, it is half that. It is 0.8 seconds. Okay. So that means that if you do have any rolling shutter effects, they will not be as bad, but it's still not a global shutter. So that is hopefully coming in the future on, you know, on newer models, but currently it's not featured. All right. So that's automated frame averaging. Do we have any other questions about frame averaging before I show you another new feature, which is called Dual Exposure Plus. Go in here, about live features on. Okay, so I don't see any questions about. Oh, Pierangelo hates dual exposure. Okay, great. This is spicy. Why do you hate it, Pierangelo? I'm curious. Okay. So, okay, yeah. Can you use strobes with electronic shutter? The answer is yes, but you have to, if you use strobes with the electronic shutter at a speed that is faster than the rolling time in the electronic shutter, which is that 1.6 seconds or the 0.8 seconds on the IQ4, you'll get a, like half your frame will have the strobe in it and then half your frame won't. So generally you don't want to do that. If you're shooting at a longer exposure time, so, you know, past 1.6 seconds on the IQ3 or past 0.8 seconds on the IQ4, you can, but generally you'll want to use mechanical shutter for that. And especially if you're using a phase one system, you've got shutter sync at all speeds on the leaf shutter lenses. So, all right, dual exposure plus. So let me quickly back up and talk about what dual exposure plus is part of. So dual exposure plus is part of something called Phase One Labs. And so what Phase One Labs is you know, Phase One has been working on these feature updates throughout the history of the XF and the IQ digital backs. And so they've continuously added features like, what we saw with the focus stacking. Some of you were talking about that feature was not in there at day one of the release of the XF. It was introduced in a future feature update, and the automated frame averaging was also introduced in a feature update. And so now what they're doing is they're creating this thing called Phase One Labs, which allows you to kind of beta test new features. So the first one of these things that they released was called Dual Exposure Plus. And if we look at what Dual Exposure Plus does, it's what we call a computational imaging feature. And so it's very similar to frame averaging in that, and so a computational imaging tool is just a fancy way of saying it takes more than one image and uses the data from those images to create one image that is superior to any of the individual images. So, your cell phones do this when they're creating HDR images, right? So the individual sensor doesn't have a super strong dynamic range. So, it'll take multiple images and it'll put them all together based on the dynamic range content. That is almost exactly what is happening here, but there's a very fundamental difference in the way that it's done with the Phase One sensors. So what Dual Exposure Plus is doing is it's taking advantage of the ability on the IQ4 150 megapixel specifically. This is only available on the 150 megapixel. To remember, because you have a rolling electronic shutter, it allows you to start reading out the next frame before the previous frame has completely finished, right? So you can start rolling the first frame, and before it hits the bottom, start rolling the second frame, right? And so there's virtually no delay between the two frames. So what they do is they create these two frames that are almost concurrent, and then they capture them at a certain distance apart in terms of exposure. So there's one frame that you pick and you say, okay, I want this exposure. And it says, okay, we'll shoot that exposure. And then right after, we'll shoot this exposure that's 3 stops brighter. Okay. And what it then does is it takes those raw files and packages them together. Okay. This is important because it doesn't mush them together into one, like just a single file. It keeps them separate, but it packages them together. And then what it does is when you bring them into Capture One, it will dynamically read out parts of the frame from one file or another based on which one has less noise, okay? So if I have an image where I've used a crazy amount of shadow recovery, using a standard image, it's just gonna take those shadows and it's gonna push them up and also push up the noise with them. If I have a Dual Exposure Plus image, instead of just pushing those shadows up, it's gonna say, okay, I tried pushing those shadows, they're getting a little bit noisy. Let me dig into that other file that has cleaner shadows and pull that content in using the Capture One engine. And so it's done dynamically. You're not merging any files and you're still working in RAW. And nothing gets finalized until you push it out into a TIFF. And that's when it gets baked into a single file. So it's a really cool way of maintaining the, the noise reduction capabilities and the raw workflow without having to, sacrifice anything. Caveats. It does not work the same way as frame averaging, right? Because frame averaging only produces one file. So there's no potential for like splotchy noise in really high dynamic range scenes. And the other question that we get a lot of times is, why would I use Dual Exposure Plus when I could use frame averaging? And the answer is that Dual Exposure Plus, and the reason that people ask is because it drops noise when you use automated frame averaging, is you have to take a certain number of frames to start getting that effect, right? So if I want to get the same noise reduction from a Dual Exposure Plus image, in frame averaging, I may have to sit there for 2 to 5 to 10 minutes, depending on what my individual exposure is. Okay. And so I'm able to do that on the fly with Dual Exposure Plus, and I can capture it in under 10 seconds and move on to the next one. If there's cloud cover that's changing, that sort of thing, we can deal with that using that. So okay, I see that we're starting to kind of get down to the line here in terms of features. So are there other questions? Only still, yes. So it also uses the electronic shutter, and it's going to be blending two images. You will get wacky results if you have moving subjects. Actually, I take that back. You will get wacky results if you have moving subjects across large parts of the frame. If you're shooting like landscape with trees that are moving sort of very slightly with leaves, and they're close enough together, or you have people moving in like a city scene, that won't cause any issues. But if you have a person that's very large in a scene and then they're moving a considerable amount, you will get not just blur, but like weirdness, especially if they're in a high dynamic range spot. And the other thing that I don't think I mentioned about this whole Phase One Labs thing is that it is called labs. Labs are where you test things. This is very much about testing features and letting people that are Phase One users sort of see what's coming down the pipeline and provide feedback on how it works and sometimes how it doesn't work. And so if someone like Pierangelo is using this feature and they hate it, that's totally fine. I mean, it's absolutely, it's a test feature. It's there if you want to use it. If there's specific reasons that you don't like it, those are things that we want to know and Phase One wants to know. And if there are ways we can improve it, we'll do that. All right, so, okay. So I want to leave time for any more questions that people might have. Are there other questions that folks have that I can answer while we're on the line here? Why it only works at a certain speed. Okay, so when you say a certain speed, are you talking about the roll time of the electronic shutter, or why it limits you to 7 seconds on the long side? Ooh, okay, we got a whole bunch of questions here. Shutter speeds, yes. So Pierangelo, the reason it only goes up to a certain shutter speed is because it is still a beta feature. They have not quite yet expanded to all shutter speeds, but if you look at their release notes, the shutter speeds that they listed are actually somewhat different from the ones that they actually released. So I think it's an artificial limitation on their edge where they just said like, hey, we're going to cut it off at this speed because if you're going to go longer than that, you just use frame averaging, right? Because at that point, frame averaging is going to give you the same noise reduction features, and it's going to give you the motion blur that you want, right? So Dual Exposure Plus is designed for situations where you don't want to sit there for 5 minutes, but you can kind of, do it. There are different tools for different modes, right? RJ45 tethering. That is a very, very good. Well, I mean, that's not a question, George. What do you want to know about Ethernet tethering? Is it plug and play? So yes, I will be 100% honest. 99% of what I do is USB-C. What I have done plug and play is going Ethernet from the camera directly. Yes, that's right. Directly from the camera into a computer. And when I do that, it works normally. Yeah, and I remember you had to have like a special router. You had to plug it into that router. That router had to go into the computer. So yes, it now supports dynamic. I don't know the proper terminology for it, but you can assign it the proper address in Capture One. So you don't need something else in the middle to route things correctly. The one thing that I haven't done is plugged it into like a wall jack here and tried to access it from, like LA. In theory, that's possible, but that is not something that is currently or I'm sorry, it is possible, it's doable. I just haven't done it. So I'm sure that there's a little bit less plug and play and more stuff that you'd have to do there. But yeah, exactly. No, and so that's the thing is it's plug and play if you're going directly to the computer, and you can go super long with the cables. So absolutely. Where are we at? Next question. Is it specific to file types? So Erling, when you say it, do you mean the dual exposure plus or the frame averaging? Yeah, so those are not specific to certain file types in that you can select whatever file type you want. For dual exposure plus, I believe it will automatically give you an IIQL 16-bit. I have not tested it with any of the other compression modes or with Sensor Plus. But for frame averaging, I know that you can use anything you like. Brian, wireless tethering is more than coming. It's here. The IQ4 has wireless tethering built in. I'm going to be 100% honest. It is slow. Oh, how? It is. Yeah. Okay. So the wireless tethering is done over Wi-Fi. If you're in a place like Midtown Manhattan where there's tons of wireless interference, it doesn't work very well. This is not a third-party option. This is in the digital back going straight to Capture One. What you would see, and let me pull up Capture One and make sure it's here. Share screens. Okay. So you see here in Capture One, what I would do here is I would go to my camera tool, I would add camera, and as long as we're on the same network, I may be able to just drop down and do it, but I can also pull the camera name and address and connect that way. So this is built into Capture One. This is now possible. Again, it is slow. It's not something that I would ever want to use as a single option. Yes, so you definitely want to have like a dedicated some kind of like access spot for it. But the problem here in Manhattan is not so much the speed of the network, it's the interference. So if you're, let's see. Connect wirelessly in addition to USB-C. If there are any issues, wireless will take over the backup. I haven't tried that. Yeah. So Brian, it may work for you. Absolutely. I don't know where you're located, but if you either have an IQ4 or want to try one out, we can definitely set that up for you, and you can give it a shot for us. George, I have not. Yes, and of course it's going to be slow, right? I mean, it's a huge file. It's doing it wirelessly. It has to confirm that everything made it over. So I'm not knocking Phase One here. I'm just saying from a functional standpoint, it's not super useful right now, but the technology is there. I haven't tried, George, that particular combination of USB-C and wireless tethering at the same time, but I do use wireless tethering and card storage. So that way, I do have a backup in that sense. Okay, let's see. Any info about Capture Pilot update with live view? That is a very good question. The answer is, so again, we don't know that it's coming or not coming, but the party line that I've gotten from Phase One is that Capture Pilot was developed for the architecture, the software architecture of the IQ 1, 2, and 3 series. With the IQ4, I mean, it drives me nuts that they called it the IQ4 because it's a totally different software operating system interface, that sort of thing. So for them to go back and basically port that old software to a new operating system for the IQ4 would be a big task that, they don't see as being, worth doing in its limited state. It may be something that they do something with and, provide an even better application for in the future, but right now there's not an option for that. And I will bring that up, Rodrigo. I will see if they would do that. I agree with you. I think they should ship a free Surface Pro to everybody that bought an IQ4. So I will let them know, and I'll get back to you with what they say about that. Brian, yes, you can use live view wirelessly, and yes, there is too much latency for it to be particularly useful. Okay, one more question. Any new features to have Capture One installed beside applying styles? The answer currently is not really. The Capture One engine is what's letting you do sort of these things like the automated frame averaging and the dual exposure plus in terms of like packaging the files properly and processing them. But in terms of like the customizable stuff where I can say, hey, I want my file to look like this or like that, that's currently the only thing that you can work on in Capture One and drop into customize onto the IQ4 back. All right. So I hope you guys got something out of this. Once again, I appreciate you taking the time and spending it with us. I am glad that, I started out kind of on the super basic level, and hopefully, we got past that and got to talk about the things that you guys wanted to talk about a little bit more. Again, Kate, you let her know if you have any other questions, and we'll get them answered for you. But other than that, oh yes, for those of you that weren't able to see the whole thing, there will be a recording that will be available and will go out, I think, Kate, via email. But thank you for joining us, and stay safe out there, and we'll hope to see you again for a future webinar. Thank you all.